On a warm summer afternoon, the air was filled with the soft hum of cicadas and the faint scent of chlorine wafting through the breeze. The sun hung high in the sky, casting golden rays over the apartment complex's sparkling pool. It was one of those perfect days where everything seemed to move slower, inviting people to relax and enjoy life. And Marcus Johnson, a man who had worked tirelessly to build his real estate empire, decided it was finally time for him to take a break. Marcus slipped into his favorite pair of swim trunks, simple black ones that matched his laid-back demeanor, and grabbed a towel before heading down to the pool area. He loved visiting the properties he owned, especially when they were as beautiful as this one. This particular apartment complex was new to his portfolio, purchased just a few weeks ago after months of negotiations. Nestled in a quiet neighborhood, it boasted lush greenery, modern amenities, and a sense of community that Marcus admired. As the owner, he could have easily stayed away from the day-to-day happenings, but Marcus preferred being hands-on. He wanted to know his tenants, understand their needs, and ensure they felt comfortable living under his management. As he stepped onto the cool tiles surrounding the pool, Marcus couldn't help but smile. The water shimmered invitingly under, the sunlight reflecting tiny ripples caused by the gentle breeze. A couple of kids splashed around at the shallow end while their parents sat nearby, chatting and laughing. Off to the side, an older gentleman lounged on a reclining chair, engrossed in a paperback novel. Everything about the scene felt peaceful, almost idyllic. Marcus chose a spot near the edge of the pool deck, far enough from the noisy group of children but close enough to observe the lively atmosphere. He spread out his towel over a vacant lounge chair and settled in, leaning back with his sunglasses on. For once, he wasn't thinking about work or deadlines or the next big deal. Instead, he let himself soak in the tranquility of the moment, savoring the rare opportunity to unwind. But peace, as Marcus would soon discover, can be fleeting. Not long after he got comfortable, the sound of heels clicking against the pavement broke the calm. Turning his head slightly, Marcus spotted a woman approaching the pool area. She was middle-aged, dressed in a crisp white sundress paired with oversized sunglasses perched atop her head. Her arms swung purposefully as she walked, clutching what looked like an expensive tote bag stuffed with magazines, sunscreen, and a bottle of water. At first glance, she seemed harmless enough, a typical resident enjoying her weekend. But something about her demeanor caught Marcus's attention. The woman stopped abruptly when she reached the poolside, scanning the area with a critical eye. When her gaze landed on Marcus, her expression shifted ever so slightly. There was a flicker of curiosity, followed by suspicion. Without hesitation, she adjusted her sunglasses, slid them onto her face, and strode directly toward him. Each step echoed louder than the last, drawing the attention of nearby residents. Marcus noticed her approach but remained relaxed, assuming she might need directions or perhaps wanted to ask about some maintenance issue. After all, it wasn't unusual for owners to mingle with tenants during such casual settings. But as she drew closer, her body language told a different story. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and her arms crossed tightly across her chest, signaling discomfort, or worse, hostility. When she finally stood beside him, Marcus removed his sunglasses and offered a polite smile. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice calm and friendly. The woman hesitated for a brief moment, then replied curtly, "I don't think you're supposed to be here." Her tone carried an edge that made Marcus raise an eyebrow. "Oh?" he responded, keeping his composure. "And why is that?" "This is a private pool," she said, gesturing vaguely at the space around them. "For residents only. Do you even live here?" Her question hung in the air, sharp and accusatory. Marcus studied her for a second, noting the way her eyes darted between him and the other people lounging nearby. It was clear she didn't recognize him, but there was more to her reaction than mere curiosity. There was judgment in her gaze, a preconceived notion that somehow he didn't belong. Deciding not to jump to conclusions, Marcus leaned back slightly, maintaining his calm demeanor. "I'm just enjoying some time by the pool," he explained, evenly. "Is there a problem?" The woman uncrossed her arms and placed one hand on her hip, her posture oozing authority. "Yes, there's a problem," she snapped. You don't look like you belong here. Maybe you should leave before someone calls security. Her words struck a chord, though Marcus did his best not to show it. He understood the implication behind her statement, the subtle insinuation that his presence was somehow inappropriate, or unwelcome simply because of how he looked. Still, he refused to let her rudeness rattle him. Instead, he gave her a measured look and nodded slowly. "All right," he said, standing up and grabbing his towel. "Let me grab my things." As he turned to leave, he paused briefly and glanced back at her. With a hint of mischief in his voice, he added, "By the way, have you met the new owner of this complex?" The woman blinked, taken aback by the sudden question. Before she could respond, Marcus began walking toward the exit, leaving her standing, there with a perplexed expression etched on her face. Little did she know her assumptions were about to lead her into uncharted territory, one that would challenge not only her beliefs, but also the dynamics of the entire apartment community. As Marcus walked away, the woman, Karen Whitmore, stood frozen in place, her mind racing to process what had just happened. She watched him closely, noting the way he carried himself with quiet confidence despite her harsh words. There was something about his demeanor that unsettled her, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Was it the calmness in his voice, or the faint smirk that played on his lips as he mentioned the new owner? Whatever it was, Karen suddenly felt a pang of unease creeping into her chest. Determined not to let him slip away without resolving the situation, Karen hurried after him. Her heels clicked loudly against the tiled pool deck, drawing curious glances from other residents who were now beginning to notice the tension between them. Ignoring their stares, Karen quickened her pace until she was only a few steps behind. "Marcus! Wait!" she called out, her voice sharp but tinged with uncertainty. "What did you mean by that, about the owner?" Marcus slowed down but didn't stop. He glanced over his shoulder at her, his expression unreadable behind his sunglasses. "You'll find out soon enough," he replied coolly, his tone deliberately cryptic. Then, without another word, he continued walking toward the gate leading out of the pool area. Frustration bubbled up inside Karen. How dare he dismiss her so casually? She clenched her fists, her face flushing red with embarrassment and anger. For years, Karen had prided herself on being assertive, someone who didn't back down when things didn't go her way. But this man's composed attitude threw her off balance. It was as if he knew something she didn't, and worse, it seemed, like he was enjoying watching her squirm. Just as Karen opened her mouth to demand answers, a familiar voice interrupted the tense moment. "Mr. Johnson, how nice to see you again." Both Karen and Marcus turned simultaneously to see an elderly woman approaching them. Mrs. Patel, a longtime resident of the apartment complex, shuffled forward with a warm smile on her face. In one hand, she held a reusable grocery bag filled with books, and in the other, she clutched a small umbrella to shield herself from the sun. Her presence immediately softened the charged atmosphere, though Karen still looked visibly flustered. "Marcus," greeted Mrs. Patel warmly, his earlier composure returning effortlessly. "Mrs. Patel, good afternoon," he said, inclining his head respectfully. "How are you today?" "I'm doing well, thank you," Mrs. Patel replied, her eyes twinkling with kindness. Turning slightly toward Karen, she added, "Have you met our new owner yet? Mr. Marcus Johnson here purchased the entire complex last month." Karen's jaw dropped. All the color drained from her face as realization hit her like a freight train. The man she had just accused of trespassing, the man she had rudely ordered to leave, was none other than the person who owned the very property she lived in. Her hands trembled slightly as she stared at Marcus, unable to form coherent words. Marcus, for his part, remained unfazed. He crossed his arms loosely over his chest and fixed Karen with a steady gaze. "Funny how things work out, isn't it?" he said, his voice smooth but laced with subtle irony. "I thought I'd come down to relax and maybe get to know some of my tenants better. Apparently, I chose the wrong day for that." Karen stammered, her usual confidence evaporating under the weight of her mistake. I didn't realize," she began, trailing off as shame washed over her. She glanced nervously at Mrs. Patel, hoping for some kind of lifeline, but the older woman simply raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by Karen's behavior. Desperate to salvage the situation, Karen forced herself to speak. "I'm so sorry," she blurted out, her voice trembling. I didn't I didn't know, it's just that—" "It's just what?" Marcus prompted gently, tilting his head as if encouraging her to finish her thought. Karen hesitated, struggling to find the right words. Finally, she managed to say, "It's just that you didn't look like you belonged here." As soon as the words left her mouth, she regretted them. They sounded even worse aloud than they had in her head. Marcus nodded slowly, as if considering her explanation. "I see," he said after a pause. "So, based on how I look, you assumed I wasn't allowed to use the pool?" Karen winced at the directness of his question. "Yes," she admitted quietly, lowering her gaze to the ground. "But I was wrong. Clearly, I made a huge mistake." The silence that followed was heavy with awkwardness. Other residents had begun to gather around, drawn by the commotion. Some whispered among themselves while others openly gawked at the unfolding drama. Karen felt exposed, like everyone could see right through her thinly veiled prejudice. She wished the ground would swallow her whole. Finally, Marcus broke the tension with a sigh. "Look," he said, his tone softening slightly. "Mistakes happen. I get that. But maybe next time, instead of jumping to conclusions, you could try asking questions first. You might be surprised by what you learn." His words struck a chord deep within Karen. She nodded numbly, too ashamed to meet his eyes. "You're absolutely right," she murmured. "I should have handled this differently. I truly am sorry." Marcus studied her for a moment longer before giving a small nod. "Apology accepted," he said simply. With that, he turned and continued toward the gate, leaving Karen standing there overwhelmed by guilt and regret. As he disappeared from view, Karen sank onto the nearest lounge chair, her mind reeling. What had started as a routine trip to the pool had spiraled into a humiliating confrontation, one that revealed more about her own biases than she cared to admit. Meanwhile, Mrs. Patel shook her head disapprovingly and muttered under her breath, "Some people never learn." For the rest of the afternoon, the pool area buzzed with hushed conversations about what had transpired. Residents debated whether Karen's actions were justified or if they stemmed from prejudice. Some defended her, claiming she was merely trying to protect the community, while others criticized her for making baseless assumptions. Regardless of where people stood, one thing was certain. Marcus Johnson's arrival had already begun to stir things up in ways no one anticipated. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the pool deck, Karen sat alone, replaying the encounter in her mind. She knew she couldn't undo what had happened, but perhaps, just perhaps, she could use this experience as a wake-up call. After all, growth often begins with discomfort, and Karen was about to embark on a journey of self-reflection that would change her perspective forever. The poolside confrontation lingered in the air long after Marcus had left, leaving behind a palpable tension that hung over the residents like a storm cloud. Karen sat frozen on the lounge chair, her hands clasped tightly together, as if trying to hold herself together. The weight of her mistake pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She replayed the scene in her mind over and over again. The dismissive way Marcus had spoken to her, the knowing look in Mrs. Patel's eyes, and the collective judgment of the other residents who had witnessed the entire exchange. Mrs. Patel, ever observant, watched Karen from a distance. She didn't say anything more but gave her a pointed glance before heading back to her apartment, her reusable grocery bag swinging gently at her side. Other residents slowly returned to their activities, though whispers about the incident continued to ripple through the crowd. Some were sympathetic toward Karen, while others openly criticized her behavior. A few even speculated about whether this would lead to any consequences for her. Meanwhile, Karen's thoughts spiraled out of control. What had she been thinking? How could she have been so blind, so quick to judge someone based on nothing more than appearances? The truth was she hadn't been thinking at all. Her actions had been driven by instinct, an instinct rooted in biases she hadn't even realized she possessed. Now, faced with the reality of what she'd done, Karen felt exposed, vulnerable, and deeply ashamed. By the time evening rolled around, the pool area had emptied, leaving Karen sitting alone with her guilt. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, she finally stood up and trudged back to her apartment. Her mind raced with questions. Would Marcus retaliate against her? Would he demand an apology or take legal action? Worse still, would the other tenants shun her for embarrassing them all? Once inside her apartment, Karen paced back and forth, unable to sit still. Every corner of her cozy living room seemed to mock her, reminding her of the privilege she enjoyed as a resident of this beautiful complex, a privilege she had nearly denied to its owner. Finally, she collapsed onto her couch, burying her face in her hands. Tears welled up in her eyes, not just from embarrassment, but also from frustration at herself. For years, Karen had prided herself on being a strong, independent woman who always stood up for what she believed in. But now she saw herself in a different light, one that wasn't flattering at all. Unable to sleep, Karen decided to write a letter to Marcus. At first, she struggled to find the right words. How do you apologize for something so profoundly wrong without sounding defensive or insincere? After several drafts scribbled on scraps of paper, she finally settled on a simple yet heartfelt message. Dear Mr. Johnson, I wanted to take a moment to sincerely apologize for my behavior earlier today at the pool. I cannot express how mortified I am by my actions and the assumptions I made about you. It was completely inappropriate and unfair, and I deeply regret causing you any discomfort or disrespect. Please know that I am taking this opportunity to reflect on my actions and learn from my mistakes. I hope you can forgive me, and I promise to be more mindful moving forward. Sincerely, Karen Whitmore. The next morning, Karen hesitated outside Marcus's door, the sealed envelope trembling in her hand. She knocked lightly, half hoping no one would answer. But when the door opened, there stood Marcus, dressed casually in jeans and a polo shirt. He looked surprised to see her, but didn't say anything immediately, waiting patiently for her to speak. Karen stammered, clutching the envelope tighter. I just wanted to give you this. She held out the letter, avoiding his gaze. Marcus took the envelope silently, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, with a small nod, he said, Thank you for bringing this. Relieved that he hadn't slammed the door in her face, Karen managed a weak smile before hurrying back to her apartment. Once inside, she leaned against the door, exhaling deeply. Delivering the letter hadn't erased her guilt, but it had been a step in the right direction, a small act of accountability that she hoped would begin to mend the damage she'd caused. Later that week, Marcus announced a community meeting for all residents. News of the gathering spread quickly throughout the complex, sparking curiosity and speculation. Some wondered if Marcus planned to address Karen's behavior publicly, while others assumed he simply wanted to introduce himself properly as the new owner. Either way, attendance was high, with nearly every tenant showing up to hear what he had to say. The meeting took place in the building's modest clubhouse, a cozy space decorated with potted plants and framed photographs of past events. Residents filed in and found seats, chatting quietly among themselves until Marcus entered the room. Dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and slacks, he exuded professionalism and authority, yet his warm smile put everyone at ease as he stepped up to the front of the room. Good evening, everyone, Marcus began, his voice clear and confident. First, let me thank you all for coming tonight. I know your time is valuable, and I appreciate you taking a moment to join me here. He paused, scanning the room and making eye contact with several residents. Karen, seated near the back, shifted uncomfortably in her chair, acutely aware that many eyes kept darting toward her. As some of you may already know, Marcus continued, I recently purchased this property. My goal as the new owner is simple: to create a welcoming, inclusive environment where everyone feels valued and respected. I believe our community has incredible potential, and I'm excited to work alongside all of you to make sure this remains a great place to live." His words resonated with the audience, earning nods of approval and murmurs of agreement. But then Marcus's tone shifted slightly, becoming more serious. "That said," he went on, "recent events have reminded me how important it is to address issues of bias and misunderstanding head-on. We all come from different backgrounds, and sometimes those differences can lead to assumptions that harm rather than help. When we allow stereotypes or preconceived notions to guide our actions, we risk alienating the very people we should embrace." Karen's heart sank as she realized he was referring to her. Though he didn't mention her by name, the implication was clear. She felt her cheeks burn with shame, but she forced herself to listen, knowing she needed to hear this. "I want to encourage each of you to approach one another with kindness and curiosity," Marcus concluded. "Ask questions instead of jumping to conclusions. Get to know your neighbors not just as faces in passing, but as individuals with stories worth hearing. Together, we can build a stronger, more united community." When he finished speaking, the room erupted into applause. Many residents stood up to shake his hand or thank him personally, praising his vision for the complex. Karen, however, remained seated, unsure of what to do. Part of her wanted to disappear, to avoid drawing any more attention to herself. But another part knew she couldn't run away. Not this time. Summoning every ounce of courage she had, Karen approached Marcus as the crowd began to thin. "Mr. Johnson?" she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus turned to face her, his expression neutral. "Yes?" "I just wanted to say, I really appreciated your speech," Karen admitted, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "And I want you to know that I'm committed to doing better, not just for myself, but for everyone here." Marcus studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that," he replied. "Change starts with awareness, and I believe you're capable of growth. Just remember, actions speak louder than words." With that, he offered her a small, encouraging smile before turning to greet another resident. Karen stood there for a moment, feeling a mix of relief and determination wash over her. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in days she felt hopeful that she could learn from her mistakes and become someone who contributed positively to the community she called home. As the meeting came to an end and residents dispersed, the atmosphere in the clubhouse felt lighter, almost renewed. Conversations buzzed with optimism, and even Karen found herself engaging with her neighbors more openly than she had in months. It was a small beginning, but sometimes, small beginnings are all it takes to spark meaningful change. The days following the community meeting brought a noticeable shift in the atmosphere of the apartment complex. Word of Karen's confrontation with Marcus, and her subsequent apology, had spread like wildfire, becoming the topic of conversation in hallways, elevators, and even laundry rooms. While some residents admired Karen for owning up to her mistake, others remained skeptical, whispering behind closed doors about whether her apology was genuine or merely a performance to save face. The tension simmered just beneath the surface, creating an undercurrent of unease that affected everyone. Karen, for her part, found herself struggling to navigate this new reality. Every interaction felt heavier, as though she were walking on eggshells. Neighbors who had once greeted her warmly now offered polite but distant smiles, while others avoided eye contact altogether. Even Mrs. Patel, whom Karen often chatted with, during morning walks seemed more reserved, offering only curt nods instead of her usual cheerful banter. It was clear that trust would take time to rebuild, if it could be rebuilt at all. At first, Karen tried to convince herself that things would eventually blow over. People would forget, life would return to normal, and she could go back to being just another resident in the building. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. This wasn't something people would simply get over. Her actions had exposed a flaw in the fabric of their community, forcing everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about bias and prejudice. And for Karen, the experience had ignited a painful reckoning within herself. Sleep became elusive. Nights stretched endlessly as Karen lay awake, replaying the incident in her mind. She thought about how quickly she had judged Marcus, how easily she had let assumptions cloud her judgment. What made her think she had the right to decide who belonged and who didn't? The questions haunted her, gnawing at her conscience until she could no longer ignore them. One particularly restless night, Karen decided to channel her emotions into action. If she wanted forgiveness, from Marcus, from her neighbors, and most importantly, from herself, she needed to do more than apologize. She needed to prove that she was willing to change. With that resolve burning inside her, she began brainstorming ways to make amends and contribute positively to the community. The next morning, Karen approached Mrs. Patel, whom she considered one of the kindest and wisest residents in the complex. Finding her tending to her balcony garden, Karen hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Mrs. Patel?" she called softly, stepping closer. "Do you have a minute?" Mrs. Patel glanced up, her expression guarded. "Yes, dear?" I wanted to talk to you about what happened," Karen said, fidgeting nervously with the strap of her handbag. "I know I messed up and I'm trying to figure out how to make things right. You've lived here longer than anyone else. Do you think there's anything I can do to help around the building?" Mrs. Patel studied her for a long moment, her sharp eyes assessing Karen's sincerity. Finally, she sighed and set down her gardening tools. "It's not easy to admit when we're wrong, is it?" she said gently. "But wanting to fix things, that's a start." Encouraged by Mrs. Patel's words, Karen nodded eagerly. "I really mean it. I want to show everyone that I'm serious about changing." Mrs. Patel smiled faintly. "Well, there's always work to be done. Why don't you join the volunteer committee? We organize events, cleanup drives, and other activities to keep the community running smoothly. It's a good way to connect with your neighbors and maybe earn back their trust." Karen agreed immediately, grateful for the suggestion. Over the next few weeks, she threw herself into volunteering, attending every meeting and pitching in wherever she was needed. She helped organize a weekend cleanup day, assisted with setting up decorations for a summer barbecue, and even spearheaded a book drive to stock the clubhouse library. At first, her efforts were met with skepticism, but gradually residents began to soften. They saw her dedication and willingness to pitch in, and while forgiveness didn't come overnight, small gestures of acceptance started to emerge. A neighbor inviting her to join a game of cards, a child waving hello as they passed by, a casual compliment about her organizational skills during the barbecue. Meanwhile, Karen also took steps to address her own biases. She spent hours reading articles and watching documentaries about racial prejudice, privilege, and unconscious bias. It was uncomfortable and humbling work, forcing her to confront parts of herself she hadn't realized existed. But with each revelation came a deeper understanding of why her assumptions about Marcus had been so harmful, not just to him, but to the entire community. One evening, as she sat on her balcony reflecting on her progress, Karen spotted Marcus walking through the courtyard below. Summoning her courage, she called out to him, "Mr. Johnson, could I speak with you for a moment?" Marcus paused, looking up at her with mild surprise. After a brief hesitation, he nodded and climbed the stairs to her balcony. "What can I do for you, Karen?" he asked, his tone polite but cautious. Karen took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I wanted to thank you for giving me a chance to make things right. I know my apology probably didn't feel like enough, and honestly it wasn't. But I'm working on being better, not just for myself but for everyone here. I hope someday you'll see that I'm truly sorry." Marcus regarded her thoughtfully, his expression softening slightly. "Apologies are important, but they're only the beginning," he said. "Real change takes effort, consistency, and accountability. From what I've seen, you're putting in the work. That's commendable." His words filled Karen with a mixture of relief and determination. "Thank you," she replied earnestly. "That means a lot coming from you." As Marcus left, Karen felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew she still had a long way to go, but for the first time in weeks she felt hopeful. Hopeful that her mistakes wouldn't define her forever, and hopeful that she could help create a community where everyone felt welcome and valued. In the weeks that followed, Karen continued to build bridges one small step at a time. She reached out to Marcus again, this time asking if she could assist with any upcoming projects related to the property. To her surprise, he welcomed her involvement, assigning her to help coordinate a tenant appreciation event scheduled for later in the month. Working alongside him gave Karen a chance to demonstrate her commitment firsthand, and their interactions grew less formal and more collaborative. Other residents began to notice the shift as well. Conversations that had once been strained became warmer and more open. During the tenant appreciation event, a lively gathering complete with food trucks, live music, and games, Karen found herself laughing and chatting with neighbors she hadn't spoken to in years. It was a stark contrast to the isolation she'd felt after the pool incident, and it reinforced her belief that growth, though difficult, was always worth the effort. By the end of the summer, the apartment complex felt different, not perfect, but undeniably stronger. Residents who had once kept to themselves now shared meals and stories, forging connections that transcended superficial differences. And while Karen knew she would never fully erase the memory of that fateful afternoon, she also knew she had taken meaningful strides toward becoming someone worthy of her neighbors' trust. Change, she realized, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning from it. And for Karen, that lesson marked the beginning of a journey that would shape not only her future, but the future of the entire community. As autumn approached, the apartment complex underwent a subtle but significant transformation. The once tense atmosphere had softened, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. Residents who had previously kept to themselves now exchanged greetings in the hallways and lingered longer during shared events. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness, lingering doubts and unspoken judgments, but progress was undeniable. And at the heart of this change stood Karen Whitmore, whose efforts to rebuild trust and foster unity had begun to bear fruit. Karen's journey hadn't been easy. Every step forward came with its own set of challenges, and there were days when she questioned whether her actions were making any real difference. But slowly, incrementally, she started noticing small victories. A neighbor thanking her for organizing a successful food drive, a child waving enthusiastically as she passed by, or even Marcus nodding approvingly after one of their planning meetings. These moments, though seemingly minor, reinforced her belief that growth was possible, even after a mistake as glaring as hers. One crisp Saturday morning, Karen decided to take another bold step toward healing. She proposed hosting a community reflection day, an event designed to encourage open dialogue among residents about inclusivity, respect, and understanding. The idea stemmed from her own experiences of self-reflection and learning, and she hoped it would provide others with a safe space to share their thoughts and feelings. When Karen pitched the concept to Marcus, he listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "It's ambitious," he admitted, "but I think it could be powerful if done right." Together, they worked out the details, enlisting the help of Mrs. Patel and a few other trusted residents to ensure the event felt inclusive and welcoming. The day of the gathering arrived, and the clubhouse buzzed with energy. Chairs were arranged in a circle to promote equality and openness, while posters featuring quotes about empathy and diversity adorned the walls. A table at the back offered snacks and refreshments, along with informational pamphlets on topics like unconscious bias and cultural sensitivity. As residents filed in, some looked curious, others apprehensive, but all were willing to participate. Karen stood at the front of the room, her hands trembling slightly as she addressed the group. "Thank you all for coming today," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "This isn't about pointing fingers or dwelling on the past. Instead, it's about starting conversations that can help us grow, as individuals and as a community." She paused, glancing around the room. Faces nodded in agreement, encouraging her to continue. "We've all made mistakes. That includes me. But what matters is how we choose to move forward. Today, I invite each of you to share your thoughts, your concerns, and your hopes for our community. Let's listen to one another without judgment and work together to create a place where everyone feels valued." Her words resonated deeply, setting the tone for the rest of the session. One by one, residents spoke up, sharing stories of times they had felt excluded or misunderstood. Some recounted personal experiences with prejudice, while others admitted to harboring biases they hadn't realized until recently. Through it all, Karen listened intently, taking notes and occasionally chiming in to acknowledge someone's courage or offer words of encouragement. Marcus also contributed, speaking candidly about his decision to purchase the complex and his vision for fostering inclusivity. "Owning this property comes with responsibility," he said. "I want every tenant to feel proud to call this place home, not just because of the amenities, but because of the people who live here. We're stronger when we embrace our differences instead of letting them divide us." By the end of the meeting, many residents left feeling lighter, as though a weight had been lifted. Conversations continued long after the formal session ended, spilling into the courtyard where laughter and animated discussions filled the air. For the first time in months, the community felt united, not because everyone agreed on everything, but because they were committed to working through their differences together. Over the following weeks, the momentum from the reflection day carried over into everyday life. Residents organized regular coffee mornings, where neighbors could connect in a relaxed setting. A multicultural potluck dinner became a monthly tradition, celebrating the diverse backgrounds of those who called the complex home. Even the children got involved, creating colorful murals in the common areas that depicted themes of friendship and acceptance. Karen remained at the forefront of these initiatives, pouring her energy into making the community a better place. Her relationship with Marcus evolved as well, transitioning from one of professional collaboration to genuine mutual respect. He often sought her input on tenant-related matters, valuing her insights and perspective. In turn, Karen admired his leadership style, which balanced authority with compassion. But perhaps the most profound change occurred within Karen herself. She no longer saw her mistake as a source of shame, but rather as a catalyst for growth. By confronting her biases head-on and committing to lifelong learning, she had transformed not only her interactions with others, but also her understanding of the world. She realized that being human meant making errors, and that redemption lay not in perfection, but in perseverance. Months later, as winter settled in and holiday decorations adorned the lobby, Marcus announced another community meeting. This time, however, the purpose was celebratory. Standing before a crowd of smiling faces, he praised the residents for their resilience and determination. "When I first bought this property," he said, "I hoped it would become more than just a collection of apartments. I wanted it to be a true community, a place where people supported one another and celebrated their shared humanity. Thanks to all of you, especially Karen, we've achieved that." The room erupted into applause, and Karen found herself blinking back tears. As Marcus stepped aside to let her speak, she took a deep breath and addressed the audience. "I never imagined I'd stand here today, surrounded by such amazing people," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "What we've built together is proof that change is possible, even when it starts with a mistake. Thank you for believing in me, for teaching me, and for reminding me that kindness has the power to heal." Her words earned a standing ovation, and as she looked out at the sea of smiling faces, Karen knew she had finally found her place in the community, not as someone seeking forgiveness, but as someone contributing to its strength and unity. The end. The story of Karen and Marcus became a testament to the transformative power of accountability, humility, and collective effort. What had begun as a confrontation born of misunderstanding had blossomed into a movement toward greater understanding and connection. And though the journey was far from over, the residents of the apartment complex faced the future with hope, knowing they had each other's backs and hearts every step of the way.